Dudes! I have a question. How important are the characters in a fighting game to you? This was actually inspired from a topic on NeoGAF, a question that was posed: how important are fighting game characters to a fighting game's success? This was an interesting question as it had me thinking for quite a bit about how important a character roster is to a fighting game, or how unimportant it is. There's a lot of guys out there that are just in it for the hardcore system, and some games have had such weird character rosters from previous versions that a lot of people just played it for that version of the game. I think a great example of this is Street Fighter III Third Strike. Street Fighter III: A New Generation, Double Impact, and eventually Third Strike were very much not that well accepted amongst the, well, general populace. In comparison to Street Fighter II and the Street Fighter Alpha series, it did not have nearly as much arcade success as those previous games, especially on their console releases as well. So how the hell did Third Strike get so popular? I think Third Strike is a great example of a system, a game mechanic that can actually pull a game along for so far amongst its competitive circuit and overall popularity that it eventually grows to be something really big. For me, personally, however, I got into Third Strike because of one thing, especially competitively, and that was the Daigo Parry video. This video really opened up many persons' eyes to Third Strike. It wasn't exactly Ken versus Chun-Li, it was mostly about the players and a huge amount of execution at the time. The execution of something that is very specific to Street Fighter III Third Strike, the parry mechanic. Parrying so many hits at such a high-stress moment is a huge feat. It's freaking amazing to do even if you practice it 1,000 times. Most likely, you'll screw it up in a real high-pressure situation. But this guy pulled it off, and that gameplay mechanic sold many people on Third Strike, even myself. For myself personally, I was kind of a Ryu player for a really long time. I played Ryu in every single Street Fighter game before, and he was my mainstay character, like the wandering samurai type dude looking for peace and knowledge. However, through Third Strike, I liked the personality and I liked the overall flair of Ken. And as I played more of Third Strike, I liked playing Ken a lot more than Ryu, and I've grown such a liking for Ken as a character through that process that I pretty much play him in every single game he's in now. Third Strike got introduced to me from its awesome gameplay mechanics and how crazy parrying can get, because I just played it like basic Street Fighter before, but when I learned parrying, I loved the game so much that the rest of the roster grew on me. Necro and Urien and Oro and a lot of these other guys were totally alien to Street Fighter III Third Strike for a very long time, and no one liked them. Like, I remember passing by this machine in arcades when I was playing Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and Street Fighter Alpha, and I'm just like, what the hell's wrong with this game? Like, the characters look so freaking weird, they look like they're out of a freak show. So there's a good situation where a fighting game can get really popular from just a mechanic, but for me personally, as far as like growing up now and running into fighting games and seeing the ones that I'm really interested in, it's really the characters. If you just had a fighting game that was just basic, bare bones, everybody looked the same but they played extremely different, it would be very hard to convince me to play that game for more than 20 minutes. Honestly, character selection and the amount of characters and which characters are in a game is really important for a guy like myself. And I think that over time, and especially where we're at right now, that can really dictate a fighting game's success. Let's look back at some previous titles. I think one of the greatest examples of this is the Soul Calibur series. Soul Calibur 1, huge game, came out, had amazing graphics, people had a huge reason to play it because it was a better than arcade version at home, and honestly one of the best fighting games ever made with its huge amount of content. Soul Calibur 2 just expanded upon that, but they did something. They introduced something that was new to fighting games, and that was guest characters with Link, Heihachi, and Spawn, giving people all the more reason to buy this game. And then Soul Calibur 3 came out, and it was okay, but it didn't have any guest characters, and I don't know, it just didn't feel as fun as the other games. So what'd they do after that? Soul Calibur 4 came out, and I think Soul Calibur 4 has sold the most of any Soul Calibur game because it had Star Wars characters. Darth Vader, Yoda, Starkiller from the recent Force Unleashed game. All these characters made an appearance in this title, and they were huge, man. People bought these games just to play as Star Wars characters, and of course they remembered Soul Calibur from back in the day, but it's a huge selling point. The other example I can give you, and why that game possibly sold so freaking well in comparison to the rest, is maybe a game called Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe.
Fight!
I'm sorry, but there's no amount of money you can give me to tell you that this game looks anything but awful. Even when I saw it when it first came out, I could not excuse the graphics, I could not excuse how clunky the characters looked, and even though I've had some personal gripes with the way Injustice looks and maybe Mortal Kombat 9, it looks 19,000 years beyond what Mortal Kombat vs. DC looked. it looks way better, and I can actually tolerate the way certain things animate and move in a game like Injustice, and I've grown to like it in a way. But guess what? Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe was freaking huge. It sold so much it would blow your freaking mind, possibly nearly as much as other popular fighting games like Street Fighter 4. Mortal Kombat vs. DC was big because of what? It had characters. It had a very popular Mortal Kombat universe that people were craving a new game for because MK9 was not out yet, and it had finally something that everyone wanted ever since the SNES, which was a new DC fighting game. Down the line where Street Fighter comes out and Marvel vs. Capcom is a thing again, and I think these games are mainstay of what has remained popular in fighting games, and it's character roster and selection. Honestly, between the Street Fighter cast, they brought back so many characters that so many people have a reason to jump into SF4 now that you can play from anybody that you kind of remember in the old days, and voila, they're big and beautiful in 3D and beating each other up. Same thing with Marvel vs. Capcom. Bringing back a huge amount of old Capcom franchise characters along with new Marvel characters was a great way to incentivize people to buy the game because you get to play this random dude I've never seen before. Honestly, who the hell was Dormammu before I even saw this? Who the hell was Hawkeye before I even saw this? You might say I'm a terrible person for not knowing these characters, and it might be true, but I had no idea. Before these characters came out, I didn't have much of a reason to get into it other than a few dudes in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and those characters I absolutely loved playing as. You can never get me to stop playing Strider, it's not gonna happen. So I have my reasons for liking these games, and it's very much attached to the characters. And a lot of people that have gotten into fighting games, especially the Versus series games where it has characters from alternate universes all coming together and fighting each other, that's a big thing. Mostly because it has such a wide variety of the cast. Either way, I think what I'm getting at is, in my opinion, character roster and the characters that are selectable in a fighting game are really important. I think that's actually one of the biggest selling points of a fighting game. If you just say, you know, people like parries in Third Strike, that's a good thing, right? Our game will be completely revolving the fact that it has a parry. Well, you're only going to get a very small amount of people to even buy your game. They might be extremely happy because there's another game like Third Strike, but at the same time, it needs to have cool characters. It needs to have a diverse roster of characters that play differently, look differently, and you have something that you can get attached to. Character roster becomes so important, probably more so in a fighting game than any other, in my personal opinion, because people will buy a game because of just one character. Just that one dude that appears in the game, people will purchase it because what happens when you play a fighting game? When you get good at one? Well, you kind of get really good with one, you get pretty good with two, you get okay with three, and you don't really play that many more. This is the majority. This is not everyone by any means, especially you competitive dudes. It's an interesting topic and conversation, but let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'd also like to cover my top 5 characters ever in a fighting game. In no particular order: Ken, Rock Howard, Siegfried, Strider, Fulgor. Well, that was easy. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below about this topic of conversation, and also leave me a note of what are your top 5 characters ever in fighting games. Thank you guys very much for watching. My name is Maximilian, and I'm gonna go play some goddamn old video games.